Hi, everybody. Brian Norcross here with your late afternoon update here on what's going on in the tropics this Thursday, August 20th. And as you know, we have two tropical depressions and another system over by Africa, although we're not concerned about that. And Tropical Depression 13 is forecast by the National Hurricane Center currently to arrive here in South Florida as a hurricane on Monday. And we'll look at that because it's open to all kinds of possibilities here, both worse and better. So take a look here. It's a complicated situation. All right, here's the latest on Tropical Depression 13 as of the 5 o'clock advisory from the Hurricane Center. Estimated top winds 35 miles an hour somewhere in this messy system. 1,008 millibars moving to the west-northwest at 21 miles an hour. That's a pretty good clip moving in the general direction of the northeastern Caribbean islands. Now, looking at this satellite and you say, wait a minute, I don't really see anything rotating around that center. This is where the National Hurricane Center estimated the center to be as of 5. And indeed, they acknowledge that. You can kind of make out clouds up here kind of rotating like that. We can also make out some kind of a circulation down in here, but we think that's more in the middle levels of the atmosphere. So the Hurricane Center is kind of taking an average, not knowing exactly what's going on out there. There is a NOAA aircraft on the way out there to kind of examine it, and I think we're stuck with a situation like we had with Isaias, where we're not going to have a well-defined center. We're going to be taking this average and making wild estimates here until a center actually develops with this system. We also notice there's kind of a flat side on it. You see that here? That means there's a lot of dry air out ahead of it. That's another kind of unfavorable or hostile environmental factor that this thing is going to face. When we look at the water vapor, where we can see the dry air in the atmosphere, all this brown out here is dry, and we notice there is a flow out here from an upper level disturbance like that. You see that? So that's tending to want to push dry air in the direction of our depression, which is this right here. So that combination is certainly unhealthy. So the bottom line is we don't think that this depression is going to get very strong very fast. It's got to get past all this messiness here, and it's going to have dry air with it as it goes. So that may be an inhibiting factor all the way along as it comes in the general direction of us here in South Florida, not just in the general direction, in the specific direction of South Florida. So here is the thinking from the Hurricane Center as of the 5 o'clock advisory. And look at the intensities down here, 35, 40, 45, just slowly intensifying. The idea is that the dry air will slowly get moistened, that upper level disturbance will slowly move away, giving the depression an opportunity to turn into a tropical storm. Now, we don't know the name of it yet because there's the other depression down in the Caribbean. The first one will become Laura. The second one will become Marco. But there's still even a big question if it's even going to get that strong in this area. Bottom line is, for the northeastern Caribbean islands, the Virgin Islands of Puerto Rico, no strong storm is expected, although they do have tropical storm watches in effect for those northeastern islands on the possibility that it does actually achieve tropical storm status. Then we get to the weekend and things get, this is where the big question marks come into play, because the Hurricane Center is taking a path that's far enough off the mountainous islands here. Remember, in the Dominican Republic here, you've got 10,000-foot mountains. Haiti has mountains. Cuba has mountains here on the eastern end. So if it comes anywhere near those mountains, that's going to be the weaker side of the cone. The away from the mountains will be the stronger side of the cone. Hurricane Center is kind of taking the middle path, so a compromise between a very weak storm and maybe even a stronger storm than forecast. So this idea of a slowly intensifying storm is just a compromise forecast between the possibilities. We'll look at the models here in just a second, and I'll show you what I mean. But the point is, it's a very low confidence forecast. And indeed, up in this area, up in here, if the storm were to be a little farther north as it came through this area over the weekend, all indications are that it would intensify more because the atmospheric pattern is conducive for intensification. If it's in this area down here close to these mountains, then it's just the opposite. The atmospheric pattern is kind of hostile because the air like if, let's say, the storm ended up right there, what would happen to the flow coming into it like this? It would have to go over these big, tall mountains in the Dominican Republic. When it goes over them, it comes down on the north side, and that air coming down the mountain is kind of like a Santa Ana wind in California, which is a dry, hot wind, which is very hostile to the storm developing. So the closer it gets to these islands, the worse the environment. Hurricane Center taking that sort of middle track right now. And then on to us here in South Florida. Now, notice they bring a Category 1 hurricane right on top of the South Florida area and the Florida Keys, again, taking a compromised position. So what we know about this is we have very high confidence that this system is coming here and it's going to be here Monday. What we don't know is how strong it's going to be. If it were to take this more southern track down in here or come in here and then come up, but somehow come reasonably close to these mountains, it's not going to be a terribly strong system. Gusty winds, downpours, that kind of thing coming through. If it stays a little farther north and comes in, still ends up in the same position, but comes by those mountainous islands farther north, then it may be stronger than a Category 1, and we need to be ready for that. So the bottom line in terms of what arrives here in South Florida on Monday is what happens over the weekend. So we have to see what happens tomorrow, first of all, down by Puerto Rico and the northeastern Caribbean islands, then how it tracks over the weekend. This is going to be a thing where the forecast could change pretty quickly over the weekend or in the late weekend before it arrives here. And we could have a storm that either never intensifies or intensifies very quickly. Either of those possibilities are quite open here. And then notice it goes up in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, if a storm ends up here and it ends up very strong, that's bad news for Tampa. That pushes water into Tampa Bay, and you can end up with significant flooding there. Also, the possibility of an onshore flow here in southwest Florida. They are much more vulnerable to storm surge there than we are here on the southeast coast. So certainly they're going to have to watch that very closely because, as we talked about, Category 1 may not even be strong enough. It's a possibility. And then heading up somewhere toward the northern Gulf of Mexico as we go on past Tuesday. Of course, that's a long-range forecast. All right, now here are the models, and notice the red one. The red one is called a consensus model or an average. And that's generally what the National Hurricane Center puts in the middle of the cone. There are two of these main consensus models. One we can show, the other is just an internal kind of experimental model at the Hurricane Center. The second one shows it a little farther off. The main one we normally look at puts it right by these mountainous islands and generally keeps the system weak. And generally, the red is generally the center of the cone. National Hurricane Center opting to keep it a little farther offshore based on that other one that they have internal, the experimental one. But bottom line is that it's a very, very uncertain situation here involving these mountains and the very conducive environment up here farther to the north. We're just going to have to see how this develops. In terms of the steering, that's very well established. High pressure is over the Atlantic out here. It's going to make a flow in our general direction. We don't think there's any doubt about that, but that little bit of difference in the angle as far as how those mountainous islands come into play makes all the difference in the world. We also notice that here at the end of this nose of high pressure here, it's very murky. So a much bigger uncertainty there on exactly what angle it might take up into the Gulf of Mexico. A little bit of angle makes a lot of difference there on who gets affected by, right now, Tropical Depression 13. All right, we also have Tropical Depression 14 going, and this goes to show you how you can be misled as well on satellites. The hurricane hunters went out there and they found kind of a calm area down here. They didn't find it up in here where you'd swear the center was, and they were locating it. So a significant relocation, and that changes the way the cone is going to work, as a matter of fact. So as it goes forward, the thinking now is it's going to run into the Nicaraguan Honduran coastline there, and that'll keep it kind of weak before it heads on up to the north, and it's going to run into the Yucatan. So starts out at 35 miles an hour, moving to the west, but then quickly hangs a right, and it heads up toward the Gulf. Now, the intensity once it gets up near the Gulf coast up there is very, very open to possibilities, because when it's down here in the Caribbean, it really could intensify more than is shown, but a little bit of interaction with land makes a lot of difference. Anyway, so once again, we have a situation where the intensity is very, very questionable. And I'd say the direction of movement here on this one is more open to question than the one that is coming towards South Florida. So anyway, two very murky forecasts here, and put them together. And yes, this is pretty unusual to have two storms going into the Gulf of Mexico. Now, the only way you can have two storms that close together is if one or both of them is fairly weak. If they're strong, if they're hurricanes, then they interact with each other and actually kind of twist around each other, because these are only about 500 miles apart, something like that, which is too close for two well-established circulations to be. They start messing with each other, so one of them ends up being pretty weak. But still, to have both of them there on Tuesday afternoon that close to each other is pretty freaking unusual. I'll tell you that. Okay, we'll keep you up to date on Local 10, of course, and we'll check this all out again tomorrow. Nothing's going to happen super quickly, but definitely both these systems are of concern for the southeastern U.S. All right, see you later.